Hello summoners and welcome to the worst reworks of all time. Now, here at ProGuides, we are always up to date and letting you guys know about reworks, that way you can be excited for them and be ready for ones that you can expect to change the meta. And while sometimes these can be great reworks that Riot did an excellent job with, such as the Warwick rework, which I think is probably the best one that they've ever done, they can also turn out to be complete nightmares. So today, let's count down the worst reworks of all time. By the way, if you like these type of history videos or League of Legends documentary style videos, I would really appreciate if you go over to my channel Exil and check it out. I make these types of history videos a lot, such as the best off-meta champions of all time, and the all-time tier list of OP champions. I'd really appreciate it if you click subscribe and check out my channel for more content. Anyway, thank you. But before we get started, I want you to click the link below and check out our website ProGuides.com. ProGuides is the best proven way to improve at League of Legends, and we post guide videos like we do on our channel every single day. We've been doing a lot more advanced content recently, and I'm sure you won't regret signing up. Also guys, we have an effective coaching feature which lets you play with and get coached by a pro. Trust me guys, you don't want to miss out on this because your friends will be absolutely stunned at how much better you've become at League of Legends. Now with that being said, let's jump into it. Our list today will be comprised of reverts, mini reworks, full reworks, items, and some honorable mentions. So first, let's go over the reverts. There was this time back in Season 6 where several champions received marksman class reworks. This was known as being one of the worst set of reworks that Riot had ever come out with, and players are still upset to this day that Graves is a jungler now and will never come back to the bottom lane. Rest in peace, tanky, bursty, DPS frontlining, backlining, ADC Graves. Well, actually maybe there's a reason that he was reworked. But of course, Graves has never been reverted. However, KogMaw was. This champion was a monstrosity. He was fueled off of the back of two bad reworks done by Riot at the same time, KogMaw himself and Guinsoo's Rageblade. So for number one on our list today, we are doing a 2-for-1 special. Let's start with KogMaw the champion. His rework saw him with a shiny new W that allowed him to break the attack speed cap and go up to 5.0 attack speed, which on its own is pretty insane. On top of that, his damage was quite a bit higher as an on-hit champion, and his damage was shifted a little bit. If you remember one season before this, AP KogMaw mid in Season 5 was a legitimate top-tier mid laner and was very strong in pro play. To combat this problem and shift KogMaw back to being an on-hit ADC rather than a mid lane mage, his damage scaled much better with attack speed and on hit rather than just straight AP. And this is why still to this day KogMaw's R has its execute damage on it rather than just being a flat amount. This is one part of the rework that they kept rather than being reverted. This was one part of the equation. KogMaw himself was definitely good, but that's not the entire problem, as we have to look at Rageblade 2. Just for reference on how insane this item was on its release, within one patch the cost was increased by 300, and then the following patch it was also nerfed. This item was out for 1 month and had its cost increased by a whole kill's worth of gold and directly nerfed. Yeah, this item was crazy. The biggest difference between Rageblade back then and what it is now is that it had sort of this Tiamat passive. Once you reached your Guinsoo's full rage stacks, it gave you AoE wave clear and damage. Plus, it had a very easy build path. Pickaxe, blasting one, and some gold. Really simple. Once completed, you could go hog wild with this thing, and KogMaw himself was no exception. Immediately after he was discovered to be OP, pros and high-elo players started to abuse him for freelo and wouldn't let up anytime soon. The problem is that he wasn't even hard to play as an ADC because it was actually just more efficient to not kite. Seriously, because you were 5.0 attack speed, players eventually found out the best way to play him was to literally stand still. I know that this sounds weird, but think about it like this. If you were to stand completely still and you're allowed to get off all of your 5 attacks per second, you will end up killing your target without much of a need to kite. Rather than kiting, don't stop your DPS, just let it ride. The best form of kiting is to just kill them. This KogMaw rework would be reverted only 10 months after its release, and in Riot's patch notes, they tell us this is the first time that they've ever gone back on changes, and they reverted what they did rather than just trying to make more changes to balance it out. They would end up noting perfectly what we're talking about here, of his Feast and Famine playstyle where late game he just stops moving and either mows down everyone or he doesn't. And that's really all he did. You either stood still and killed everyone, or stood still and died. Not necessarily a healthy playstyle. Ever since this revert, KogMaw has never really been the same. He certainly was good during the Ardent Sensor meta with Lulu and KogMaw, but he's failed to reclaim his Season 6 glory. As for Rageblade, on patch 6.9, it would have its AoE passive removed only after a few months of it being in the game, and eventually, as you know, 2 seasons later on 8.6, it would receive another rework and would be OP once again, and Kai'Sa that season would just become the new KogMaw. Throughout his history, Rengar has never been a particularly balanced champion. He's had times where he was incredibly dominant in solo queue, very dominant in competitive play, and times where he's been AD, AP, top lane, jungle, everything. And he's been through a large amount of changes. For example, on his release, did you know that his bola was point and click? Literally, yeah, that was in the game. That really existed. He could point and click his E. Anyway, as far as full-on reworks, Rengar was a part of the massive Assassin update to kick off Season 7. Talon, Zed, Katarina, Akali, Echo, Kha'Zix, and many more would all be in the patch notes, but Rengar's would be hated by the community so much that it would end up being reverted. And it wasn't even necessarily the players playing against him, but rather the Rengar mains themselves. As far as the changes, this would go down as the Swim Q Rengar rework, as they made a big change for his main damaging ability. Instead of just being an empowered auto attack, it was now an AoE ability with a very unique hitbox. Because of this, a lot of players would find out quickly that he just felt pretty clunky and a bit more awkward to play. He was definitely good, don't get me wrong. In fact, he was extremely overpowered, but for different reasons. Rengar would be more competitively viable than ever before with this version, and instead of being a crit or lethality assassin, he was more of a bruiser. He was thought to be one of the best bruiser junglers in competitive play, and Reignover in NA showed the rest of the region just how good this version of Rengar really was. The build would be your warrior enchantment into Black Cleaver, into Spirit Visage, or other tank items, and in pro play specifically, he could zone teams from choke points with his new R and not allow them to rotate without the threat of Rengar jumping on them. He would eventually be reverted due to this nightmare in pro play and general dislike for his swim Q AoE from the Rengar mains community. The clunkiness, the fact that you could miss your Q, all just didn't really sit right with them. And probably the most controversial revert of all time in League of Legends, last up on our list today is LeBlanc. On exactly the same patch for Rengar's Assassin update, LeBlanc had also been given one too. Historically, LeBlanc has had a couple of problems with her balance. Things like how strong her early game is, how frustrating her passive can be, and how her chain had a weird hitbox. All of these things would be addressed with her rework. Most notably, the chain would eventually be fixed. But most importantly, the thing that needed to be looked at is her kill combo. In the old and now current version of LeBlanc, the idea that you can wait in a bush, have an ADC walk up too far to farm the wave, press 2 point and click abilities, which is Q then R, then follow up with a big AoE W, completely one-shotting them in less than a second, and then always jumping back to your distortion to safety is kind of unhealthy. As an avid LeBlanc player myself and somebody who absolutely loves this champion, I was very excited to see what Riot would do. Their main attempt was to fix her wave clear problem, give her a new unique clone mechanic, that way she feels more like a deceiver champion, and put her Q passive mark on her normal passive. However, to balance this out, LeBlanc would have a cook timer, if you will, on this mark, which meant that it didn't activate for 1.5 seconds. When it did pop, you would output massive damage, and this worked well with all of your abilities. Most notably, it gave you great wave clear with your W into Q combo, where it bounced to all of the targets that you hit with your Q, very similar to the way that Ryze Spellflux works. Finally, LeBlanc had consistent wave clear, more counterplay, and new sets of mimicking tools, that way her ultimate was a global deceiver. But wait a second. Riot, you just gave an assassin consistent wave clear, which is one of her main weak points that could be abused. And also, those little bounces from her passive counted as all single target abilities. So all of a sudden, LeBlanc could build Gunblade and it was insane. You could take any trade that you wanted, even lose the trade, but then on the next wave, you would heal all the way back up to full health. Or if you really wanted to, you could go over to your junglers or the enemy junglers' camps and just heal off of the raptors. At the time, LeBlanc was probably the best split pusher we had ever seen in competitive play, and because her ultimate allowed her to mimic any abilities she wanted, rather than being just the most recent ability used, that means that she couldn't even be punished in a side lane for using her W on the minion wave, since she could always just press RW. It didn't even have to be off cooldown. She was nerfed a bunch of times because of how this Gunblade interaction worked, and it would eventually be fully reverted to her old self as we know it now. Alright, now that we have the reverts done, let's talk about mini reworks that have gone wrong, and since they're many, we can run them down pretty quickly. Aurelion Sol is the newest member on this list, as he just got this mini rework. Now his W is no longer a toggle, rather more of a cooldown based ability. When you turn on his W, it rotates really quickly around him for a few spins, but then it kind of dies down and then goes on cooldown. He has a few other quality of life buffs with this update, which are honestly pretty good, like the buffs to his E being pretty nice, but overall this is not liked within the Aurelion Sol community, and most of the mains are begging to change it back. Maokai was updated along with the major tank updates to Zac and Sejuani. Sejuani clearly benefited the most from this as she's been an amazing champion since the changes. Zac, on the other hand, had to have his R reverted and is now more or less the same champion, but Maokai might be the worst. I'm sorry. I'm totally sorry if you play Maokai, but holy crap, his new R is terrible. This is like the worst ability in the game. Yeah, I understand that it's a lane wide, but I don't care. Why is it not half of the size, but flies at 3 times the speed? This is easily the crappiest tank ultimate in the game, and I will take any other tank ultimate over this. Sejuani, Malphite, Amumu, so much better than this. The thing is, it's not even a short cooldown either. It starts at 2 minutes long at level 6. I think it completely violates the rule of rewarding gameplay. It's way too long of a cooldown and is way too hard to be useful, but okay fine, imagine if it did 3 or even 4 times the damage that it does now, especially if it travels far. I think that it's so unsatisfying to play because if you actually do get a good ultimate off, it doesn't even feel like it matters. Very different than getting something like a 3-man Nami bubble, which is hard to hit, but if it happens, you feel like a god. The fact that it's so unsatisfying and the fact that his old ultimate, although it was broken, of course, was infinitely better, just makes it so he feels completely unsatisfying to play. And while those Maokai changes might be pretty bad, the recent Rise rework might be one of the worst things that Riot has ever done to a champion. And I'd be more okay with accepting it as well if I also didn't have some serious qualms with their stance on it. Rise before this mini rework was one of the most skill expressive, rewarding champions to play in the entire game. Maybe even number 1 on that list. You needed hundreds of games of Rise to perfectly understand how to use all of your abilities. When are you supposed to use your shield combo? What about your DPS combo, wave clear combo? Somewhere in the middle where you try to maximize both your damage but also get the 2-second root. At the highest level, I understand he was very OP and broken. I know that he needs changes, but what they've done to this champion is literally unacceptable. Without his shield and without his good laning phase, he is really nothing. He went from being the most prioritized champion in the entire game at the pro level to 0 relevance. And Riot's stance on it? Well, they've been saying it's just fine. In fact, he's doing better than ever. Look at his win rate. It's close to 50%, but before he was only 44%. So now he's 49%. Great work, team. Amazing job. What is the problem with this analysis? Why do I feel like this is a fundamental flaw in their design and philosophy? Well, I think it's because they made him so much easier to play. The way that you win on Rise now is get to level 16 and spam EQ. And then when your EQ is off cooldown, you press EQ. Then when you EQ, and then you EQ, and then when you're done EQing, make sure you press EQ. They have removed the need for hundreds of hours of practice, and now his entire damage combo is only 2 buttons, one of which is point and click. And now that the E always bounces, it's not even that hard to get your damage off. It's about whether or not you get to your level 16 power spike when you finally come online. On top of that, his win rate is up, but his play rate is down, only indicating that the most dedicated Rise mains are touching the champion. So I really would hope that he's near a 50% win rate. Otherwise, you would just be inting for locking in Rise. When it comes to full reworks, the worst one of all time has to be the Mordekaiser rework. And no, we're not talking about the recent full visual gameplay update with his new Shadow Realm, we're talking about the Juggernaut rework. This champion was probably the biggest goof up by Riot for that season, maybe ever. He was designed as a bottom lane carry who, instead of being normal, decided to just break all of the rules of the game. Mordekaiser gained experience in a duo lane as if he was solo, meaning that if you were snowballing and doing well, you might be level 6 and the enemy bot lane is level 4, sometimes even level 3. On top of this pretty bad idea, his numbers were completely over the top, and he was the most banned champion at Season 5 Worlds. You could also build anything you wanted. In fact, there wasn't even a solid build path. Some max Q and went Trinity Force, some went full AP with a W max. It didn't really matter because the point was that Mord is OP and build him however you see fit. Full tank doesn't really matter. Full AD with Trinity Force doesn't really matter. Full AP with Death Cap doesn't really matter. Pick Mord, win game. Now for all of the recent reworks that everyone seems to love and hate, Aurelia, Aatrox, the new Pantheon, the new Mordekaiser, Nunu and Willump, nothing really steals the show of being problematic like Akali. I wouldn't say that it's a complete failure, kinda anyway. It's true that Akali is really cool. Her new art, skins, gameplay pattern, her W interactions, global mobility on her E resulting in some funny plays, and many more things that are just cool about Akali. As far as the visual team and the design team, I think they did an excellent job with her. Now, for the gameplay team, holy crap. She has problems on many fronts, but the argument that I heard once that has stuck with me ever since is that Akali's biggest problem is that she is the definition of an assassin bruiser hybrid. She has abilities and a playstyle that is very similar to what a bruiser does. In fact, she's more of a bruiser, truthfully, but her assassin level of damage also makes her completely unbalanced. She has all of the escape tools and survivability of a diver and a bruiser like Vi, Renekton, Riven, and Yasuo, but can literally one-bang you with her gunblade. Think about how many things that they had to remove from her kit. When this champion was released, she had true stealth on her W, she had healing on her Q, she had a stun on her ultimate, and these are just the things that they had to completely remove. What about all of those nerfs and those changes? It kind of feels like every single patch there are more changes to Akali, more damage here, but nerfed there, completely gutted one patch, buff back to viability on the next patch. Day after day, people just realize, you know what, maybe this champion is just a total nightmare. For the full reworks, lastly, I think the laziest and most laughable thing that they've ever released was Season 5 Rise. Oh yeah, if you played back then, prepare for a trip down nostalgia lane because really we did not forget about him this time. This guy, this champion, this masterpiece of destruction was unthinkable levels of broken. He was so beyond easy to play, it wasn't even funny. All you had to do was hit level 6. That's it. You built mana and made it to level 6. The entire reason this worked had everything to do with your passive and your ultimate. Your passive was Arcane Mastery. Rise gains an Arcane Mastery stack for 6 seconds every time he uses an ability, stacking up to 5 times. At 5 stacks, Rise becomes supercharged for 5 ability casts or for some time, shielding himself in the process and causing him to reduce the cooldown of other abilities by Overload's amount. So basically what you had to do was stack up to your supercharge, and then when you supercharge, you're big man on campus for a few seconds, and you go Earth mode and probably win the trade, right? Okay, but then you're vulnerable for a few seconds. Fine, okay, on its own, this isn't the worst. It's good, but not completely broken. However, combo this with his ultimate, and Rise was crazy. Rise's ultimate was Desperate Power. Passively, you gained permanent cooldown reduction. And when you turned it on, for 6 seconds, Rise gained bonus spell vamp, 80 bonus movement speed, and his basic abilities dealt half of their damage to all nearby enemies around the primary target. So again, you would stack up to your Arcane Mastery, and then when you were ready, you turned on your ultimate and spammed your buttons as fast as possible. So on top of going full Earth mode, you did massive AoE damage, you gained 80 flat movement speed, and you healed for this damage, and gained free CDR. Oh, and by the way, you were shielded. Oh, and by the way, the Earth mode CDR you got actually worked for your Desperate Power. So at level 16, if you wanted to keep on your ultimate permanently, you could do that. Permanent, AoE, spell vamp, and movement speed with a point and click route so your opponents can never move. Oh, and permanent shields. Let's just say there's a good reason why there's an SKT Rise skin. Thank you so much, Faker, for abusing him. Alright, let's finish up today with some honorable mentions. The Skarner rework in the Juggernaut patch did make him a lot more viable. In fact, he was the highest win rate champion of all time on his release. However, his spires never really worked out the way that Riot has wanted. He makes the honorable mentions list because they didn't completely ruin the champion since he was never really viable, and he has been used sparingly in pro play with his Predator build in the jungle, and by all means is a decent champion. But the fact is, these spires and the minigame that they provide feel pretty underwhelming and not fully fleshed out. They could be a lot cooler and could be something that your team fights over like a mini objective, but nobody really cares about them. Lastly, we have Ornn. Ornn is a really cool champion, and he's one of the most skill-expressive tanks. He's not really that balanced, hence the reason why he had to receive a mini rework to begin with, but without his shield, he's just not the same. I think the idea that he builds his teammates' items now is really cool, and it makes it so that you don't noob trap your team into buying first item Molten Edge, because it's definitely not worth it. But ever since these changes, he's never really been the same, and Ornn mains have been begging for buffs. Without the shield, his laning phase just isn't what it used to be. Anyway, that's gonna wrap it up for this video on some of the worst all-time reworks in League of Legends. Let us know if we missed any reworks in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed watching this video, please hit that like and subscribe button. Also, make sure you check out ProGuides.com if you want to see huge improvements to your rank right now. Thank you so much for watching, good luck in your next couple of games, and I will see you on the Rift.